Welcome in to Greenville Grit, Greenville residents in touch on 103.7 WTIB. This is the local show that keeps you connected and in touch with the issues that affect what's happening in your community. Greenville Grit is sponsored by Ribeyes, Kid Construction, and Greenville Toyota. Now, here are your hosts for Greenville Grit, Terry Williams and Michael Overton.
Good evening and welcome to Greenville Grit. I'm Terry Williams.
And I'm Michael Overton. Terry, good to see you this evening. We have a little more distance between us than we usually do. If there's always someone sitting in this seat, but because we have distance, we have a very special guest on the phone that's going to be with us today.
That's
Speaker
right.
Tom Tillis, as well as a U.S. Senate candidate running against Kay Hagan. He's on the Republican side. But before we get to him, as always, at the beginning of the show, we got to thank the sponsors that let the show be possible.
That's right.
Who you want to thank first?
Well, one of my favorites. I love all our sponsors, but I'd love some ribeyes right
Ribeye
now.
Steakhouse.
That would be really good.
Get a big juicy ribeye.
That's
If you
right.
mention Greenville Grit, you get a 25% discount at Ribeye Steakhouse on Fire Tower Road in Greenville, as well as in Williamston.
That's right.
And great steaks, great salad bar, great pork chops, you name it, they've got
That's
it.
right.
But make sure you mention Greenville Grit, and then we got to thank the Overton Group, real estate and professionals.
Thank you, Michael.
Service in Greenville and Eastern North Carolina and commercial real estate sales and leasing, residential real estate property management. Greenville Toyota, thank you for Craig Ghost and the Greenville Toyota team. If you're looking for a new Toyota or Scion vehicle or a new used car, go see those guys. You can see them on Memorial Drive or greenvilletoyota.com. We also have Kid Construction Group.
Green Builder.
Green Builder. If you want to see the kind of homes they build, go to kcgbuildgreen.com. Bill Kidd's a good friend of mine and the proprietor of that business. Builds a beautiful home. And as Terry said, a Green Builder. Check out their website again, kcgbuildgreen.com. We're going to take a quick 2-minute commercial break, come back, and we'll have the speaker on the phone, and we'll talk about this election going forward. So we'll be right back in 2 minutes.
Sounds good.
Announcing.
This is Michael Overton. Welcome back to the Greenville Grit. I've got my co-host here, Terry Williams, and on the phone we have North Carolina Speaker Tom Tillis. Tom, you on the line with us?
I am. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. For those listening, Tom is also U.S. Senate candidate running against Kay Hagan, and not just a candidate and speaker, but also a personal friend of mine and my family's. Tom, I really do appreciate you coming on the air today and giving us 10, 15 minutes of your time.
I'm glad to be here, Michael.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Hopefully I don't have to take you on any more cornhole games in the future. That was such a beating you gave me last time, so we'll skip past that part.
I think I beat your daddy, too. I don't care what he says.
Well, he changes the rules to his advantage on that, so we'll leave that alone.
Sounds like my grandson.
Yeah. But we got a few things we want to talk about. Again, just to have the opportunity to talk to you and Terry, I think you wanted to kind of start it out with one of the questions.
Well, locally, we've all been a little concerned about the ads that have been running, and so I think today what I would like to ask you about are some of the ads, specifically to the cutting of the education funding. This morning on Talk of the Town, Henry had John Hood on. He explained it beautifully, and I just thought I would put that question out to you about not have we had funding decreased for our education, but really it has increased. Can you address that for us?
Yeah, in many ways, Kay Hagan, Senator Hagan, is using the false math in reverse. They use false math to sell people on Obamacare. Now we know it's going to cost $1 trillion in debt. And then Senator Hagan saying we cut $500 million in education. We're spending $1 billion more a year in 2014. than we did when the Democrats were under control. So, it's another one of these false attacks that you have to just recognize are out there. But I believe at the end of the day, when people recognize that we've given a 7% average pay raise, we had to make up for some of the starting teachers, where a big gap had existed between the veteran teachers and starting teachers. But an average 7% pay raise, one of the biggest raises in a generation, and we've continued to increase funding for K through 12 education. Those are facts, and I think John Hood did a great job in an op-ed I saw over the weekend describing that. We just hope the voters will get out there and understand the truth.
That's exactly right. That's right. Well, and I'm hoping to see, and I'm sure we will, more and more ads about all your accomplishments that you've helped North Carolina get to in quite a short time. I think people forget that Kay Hagan was in our legislature from '99 to 2008. I didn't ever hear of anywhere near accomplishments that you all have been able to do since the Republicans have taken over control of our state, and how much you all have gotten done, in such a short amount of time.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, in fact, it's just the opposite. The decade before Republicans took control of the House in 2011, we saw some of the most out-of-control regulatory burdens and tax burdens placed on the state of North Carolina. I have spent the last 3.5 years cleaning up Kay Hagan's mess that she left behind when she was a state senator. And incidentally, a state senator who passed budgets out of the Senate that cut teacher assistants, a state senator who passed what she sold to the North Carolinians as a temporary sales tax increase. That harms the poorest people in North Carolina and working families disproportionately. She made a promise similar to the 24 promises she made about Obamacare, letting you keep your policy and keep your doctor. She made a promise that those tax increases would be temporary, and then later on she voted to make portions of them permanent. So Senator Hagan, the one thing I will say about Senator Hagan, she's consistent. She never saw a new regulation she didn't want to pass, and she never saw a tax that she didn't want to pass, and she doesn't hesitate really to shift focus away from the failures she went to Washington. She's failed the people in North Carolina, and she's always trying to shift attention away to these things that are just patently false.
That's
Well,
right.
That's the difference in this election.
That's
right. And well, you brought it up, so let's go there first. It really comes down to taxes. I mean, one of the things that you constantly see, and this is a Democrat thing, over and over and over, is cutting taxes for the rich, and I love how they put this on the whole cutting taxes for the rich thing, because some of the numbers that Brian Brown did our local representative in a recent presentation talks about how we are number 6 nationally in terms of competitiveness, and our unemployment dropped at a rate much faster than our neighbors in the Southeast. And let's talk about taxes and what it wasn't cutting taxes for the rich, but cutting taxes for corporations to entice them to want to come to North Carolina. I mean, can you speak to that?
Well, and it even goes we got to go back to 2011 when the first tax that we cut put $1.2 billion a year back in the pockets of individuals, working families, and the poor, because we cut the sales tax that the Democrats had implemented in 2009. It was another game like Senator Hagan played earlier. They promised a temporary sales tax, and we fulfilled the promise of making it temporary by cutting it on June 30th of 2011. That was $1.2 billion in sales taxes back into the pockets of some of the poorest, hardest working people in North Carolina. That was our first priority. Then we went on to repeal an income tax surcharge on working families and businesses. And then in this cycle, we took our tax burden. We were 44th highest tax burden in the nation up until last year. And with one tax reform bill, we actually reduced it to 17th in the nation. And we got to go back on unemployment, too. North Carolina had the greatest drop in unemployment over the last 5 quarters of any other state. We went from 10.4 to down around the national average at about 6.4. That's a performance that no other state has seen. And in spite of the fact that Senator Hagan votes for regulatory overreach, for Obamacare, for additional taxes, we're finding ways to help North Carolina stay afloat and improve, in spite of the fact that Senator Hagan's gone to Washington and made it harder and harder for us to heal the economy and create jobs.
Well, I think regulation is another subject we can discuss. I think one of the things, and this is a personal discussion you and I had, was talking about sunset provisions that you guys put in place. And for those who aren't listening, sunset provisions, Tom, if maybe you can explain it, but also talk about what you guys have done with that to help with the regulation burden.
Well, what we did is come in and do a common sense review of regulations that did make sense for building community and others. We extended permits that were about to expire because they spent all the time and money to get permits. The economy went down. They were about to run out of time before the permits would expire. We did basic things like just extending the time period so that they had the opportunity to bring projects to fruition. The other thing that we did, though, is we started putting the burden on regulators to justify regulations that are already on the books and any new regulations that go beyond federal standards. Now, that's basically limiting government and limiting regulations. You need some regulations are necessary. Many of them are not. They don't have a benefit. Now, contrast that against Kay Hagan, who cast the deciding vote for Obamacare, one of the largest regulatory burdens, single burdens in the history of the United States, and also one of the largest combination of tax increases in the history of the United States. There are very clear differences in the two Senate candidates running this election. Big regulation, big government. Kay Hagan apparently supports the EPA regulations that will add about $1,200 in related cost of energy to the average household. Kay Hagan says that she's concerned with the poor and working families, but her policies are harming the poor and working families disproportionately. That's what we've got to turn around in Washington.
That's right. I agree with that. Well, Tom, when you do go to Washington, D.C. to represent us, I would think the public would just like to know what are the maybe top things on your mind that you would start, addressing when you get there. What do you think is maybe the top two most important things that you need to look at first?
We got to heal the economy. One of the best ways you can do that is get spending in line and get the debt, which is approaching $18 trillion, under control. And it's not only an economic threat, it is a threat to our national security. Even members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have pointed that out as a major threat, something we have to deal with. So we've got to heal the economy and grow jobs. We've also got to protect our people. And that means we've got to stop leading from behind on foreign policy issues. The president is now taking steps to deal with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and he's trying to develop a Middle East coalition. But we cannot forget that he's trying to come up with a solution to a problem that he created by his weak leadership and his failure to lead on foreign policy. And I've got to just provide one more comment there. We need senators, particularly in states like North Carolina, where we have a large military presence, to go up there and fight for men and women in uniform.
That's right.
Senator Hagan is on the Armed Services Committee. She's missed half of the Armed Services Committee meetings over the last 2 years. Senator Hagan chairs a subcommittee on emerging threats and capabilities. 2 weeks ago in the debate against me, she said ISIS is our greatest threat. Senator Hagan has never held a committee hearing in a subcommittee she chairs to discuss the emerging threat of ISIS. So let's make sure we protect our country. Let's make sure that we have a strong foreign policy where we lead the world, and let's make sure we heal the economy, get people back to work. We need to make those top priorities. I think they're top of mind for anybody listening to this show and anybody that's going to vote on November 4th.
Well, Tom, I got one last question for you. You mentioned the $18 trillion in debt, and I don't think anyone could disagree that is such a huge burden for us. How do we start, though? Because when you look at the amount of dependency that we've created with Americans and the expectation that they're going to have the government handouts, how do we roll some of this to the point of being manageable and get the debt to where we can start paying this debt back off?
Well, Michael, you got to do a lot of things. One thing is you've got to figure out ways to stimulate the economy, and I think you can begin to do that by repealing burdensome regulations like Dodd-Frank, replace it with something that makes more sense. But across the board, regulatory reform, like North Carolina, will have an effect on the American economy. So a part of the way that you begin to get the debt under control is to get the economy back on track so that you have the revenues to pay it down. Then the next thing you have to do is get spending under control. I mean, you have to limit the growth of government. You have to find ways to reduce these ongoing obligations that are unfunded. Obamacare is going to add another $1 trillion to the debt. So if we did nothing more but let the current policies stay on the books, many of our entitlement programs, many of the things that we need to fund are going to be at risk of bankruptcy in 15 years or so. So you've got to look at everything. You've got to get spending under control. You've got to get the economy back on track. And you've got to get rid of foolish things like sequestration. Sequestration threatens 20 to 30,000 jobs in North Carolina, predominantly down east around our military bases. And having a senator like Kay Hagan vote for sequestration tells me she doesn't understand the negative effects of that continuing to be the way that they manage spending. She doesn't really understand that it's an indiscriminate cuts that harm North Carolina more than many other states. We just got to have people that know that, understand the finances and how to get the country back on track financially.
That's right. Well, last week when they passed the bill about funding the fighting in Syria, there was more in that bill that was passed for funding. I know that Walter Jones told me he did not vote for that. There were some things tacked on to that, I understand, and I don't know if you know about that, but that that to complete the funding for Planned Parenthood and to complete the funding for Obamacare. Are you familiar with what was in that bill and if that's true?
What they did is what Harry Reid typically does, is he plays games. He doesn't allow many votes in the Senate, and when he does, he always has poison pills wrapped around it. You know, we had to take action with ISIS, and in order to get that measure put forward, they wrapped it around other measures that some Republicans decided they had to vote for. But you know, it's just another classic example of how this Congress ceases to function. The House of Representatives have sent Harry Reid and Kay Hagan hundreds of bills, and they've only heard a few dozen. The Congress is not functioning. Congress, Kay Hagan, by voting with the president 96% of the time, and Harry Reid have decided the president is going to control the congressional agenda. That is dangerous for our democracy, and it's a broken promise to people in North Carolina when Kay Hagan in 2008 said, I'm going to reach across the aisle and finally get something done in this country. I'm not going to vote with the president 92% of the time. Well, she was right. She's not voting 92% of the time. She's voting 96% of the time with this president. And she has shut down the legislative branch in the process.
Well, and I think you're definitely right with that. I mean, and that was a telling ad that you guys did to really help people understand, for at least what I feel is a pretty unpopular president in this state. But Tom, thank you so much again for coming on. We're not going to take any more of your time up, and you know, you got our support on this. Hopefully everything will go well for you. But we look forward to having you in Washington in November.
Yeah, and I want to tell you.
I appreciate it. Y'all have a great week.
Yeah, I really much appreciate your common sense approach to everything. And it makes it easy when we listen to you for people to understand what you're saying, and I appreciate that.
Well, I hope so. I tell everybody it's sometimes difficult, but it's not complex. We need to get back to common sense, principled leadership in Washington. When we do, we'll turn this nation around. We'll be back to the great nation it deserves to be.
Well, Tom, thank you.
Perfect.
Good luck, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon.
Thanks.
So everyone, that was Tom Tillis on the air with us, spending a few 10-15 minutes with us and going over some of the hot topic issues. And you know, I kind of made the crack there at the beginning about cornhole. We had an opportunity to play that together, and he beat me pretty bad. It was pretty embarrassing. But
he was
one
getting
of the
ready
things
for November.
that I liked about him and that really impressed me is the first time I met him was I think it was at a fundraiser, and it wasn't for him. I think it was for someone else. But he walked up to me out of the blue. Didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was, and introduced. He didn't introduce. I'm Speaker Tom Tillis. He said, "Hey, my name's Tom. What's your name?"
Yeah.
And he showed an interest. And I met other politicians in the past that they going to come see you if you're going to give them some money, but it had nothing to do with that. I mean, he was sincere in that, and I've just enjoyed getting to know him and my family being able to call him a friend.
Exactly.
So it's been pretty cool.
Exactly. Well, it's like I said, I can't name one thing that Kay Hagan has done, but I can name a whole lot that the Republicans and Speaker Tillis have accomplished.
But you know what, though, Terry? It comes back to love him or hate him. It's like the days of Jesse Helms.
Right.
Whether you love Jesse or you hated Jesse, Jesse got things done.
He did.
And whether you agree with everything that the North Carolina legislature has done or not, he has gotten a lot done. And he's probably been one of the more effective speakers that we've had. They've gotten a lot done in 2 years. And it's interesting to hear people screaming and complaining. But going back and looking, for 140 years, Republicans never had any control over all three forms of government in this state. And to say that they're doing these terrible things, but yet when you look at the real stats, our unemployment is one of the lowest. It's dropped more. The Medicaid, we forgot to ask them about Medicaid, but the Medicaid deal, where we paid off of about $2 billion of our $2.5 billion in debt in 2 years.
Our debt is down, and that's what's important.
For the unemployment deal, I mean, they've done a pretty daggone good job.
Yes,
I won't say every single thing they've done has been great, But for the most part, I'd say they've been done pretty good job.
That's right.
So we're going to go to our second commercial break. We're going to come back, wrap the show up. So we'll see you back in 2 minutes.
Are you thinking about
Welcome back. Michael, we've had a great discussion.
It was a
interview
good discussion.
with Speaker Tom Tillis.
Future
Senator, yeah. He just really explains things so that everybody can understand it. And
well, that's one of the things that's appealing about him is he's so down to earth and very easy to talk to, and I mean smart. The guy's smart.
He doesn't beat
and quick on his
around. He
feet,
gets to the point, and that's what we need. So I'm
well,
really pleased and thank him very much.
What we need, though, Terry, and this is locally, this is state, this is nationally, and one thing that I feel that we've been missing for so long now is leadership.
That's right.
And leadership, a lot of people are born natural leaders. And that's great. You can have a natural-born leader, but you need a natural-born leader with experience. And that's one thing. When I say he's been an effective speaker, he's also got the experience in business. He's done that. He's done the private sector, and he comes. He's not a lifer in the public sector, which is always a very dangerous combination, in my opinion. People need to have experience. How can you go into something and tell us how we're going to do things when you've never done it yourself, and not being able to relate to that? And for people listening in. We've talked in the past when Brian was on about the restored funding for East Carolina University and the Brody School of Medicine, and I can tell you just because of knowing everything that went on behind the scenes with that, the $20 million approximately that was almost taken away was restored. Not all of it, but almost all of it was restored. That was directly due to the efforts. I mean, the local guys, Chancellor Ballard, and several local people were involved, but Brian Brown and Tom Tillis fought like crazy to get that passed through. And so, I mean, if you work at ECU, you need to be thankful because that was a tremendous loss and could have resulted in a lot of jobs.
That's right.
And it could have really had detrimental effects on the Brody School of Medicine. So
absolutely.
That's that.
I know. Well, a couple of things I just want to mention real quickly is some things that he talked about, but also just to remind everybody again from that interview that North Carolina is the #1 largest drop in the nation of unemployment. And on top of that, 15% of all new jobs created in the United States were created in our state.
Terry, let's talk about education. And I'm glad you asked him the question there at the beginning. But your daughter is a teacher.
She is.
So let's talk about that because that's obviously with John Hood talking this morning about the reality is funding has been increased. Your daughter's in the classroom. What does she see? That's right.
Well, she is happy. She's a 6th-year teacher and was certainly happy, to see this. I think one thing that I have taken from all of this is some of the teachers, older teachers, or not older in age, but older in time served, had felt like they were not done justice, but the system has not been fair all along. Any job or profession you go in, you expect to get the most of your raises probably in the first 10 years that you're working anyway. You're not going to stay in a profession if you're not continually doing better and getting raises. So I think that was their #1 concern. People like my daughter might look at that 6th or 7th year and say, I cannot make a living doing this anymore. I love it. I love to teach, but I've got to go into a different profession that will reward me for my time. And I think now this has given those younger teachers the idea that, I can do this. I can stay. If they're going to follow through and do what they said they'll do for us, I can do that. And I think that they're a lot happier with the scale and the way it's been brought more up to, what the other teachers were getting.
Well, one of the things that Tom pushed through very early was the sunset provision. And what I understood, maybe I'm wrong on this is what he told me, but what I understood is the sunset provision is I think a 10-year review period for all regulations. At first, I think it was just really for more environmental, but Brian Brown said in our last interview that it was for all. Right. And I think the city needs to be looking at that. Right. I think as a city, and let's get to the Greenville politics side of things, we need to be looking at every fee, every regulation, every law that this city has passed probably every 10 years and say, is this still effective today?
That's right.
Does it matter today, or does this harm the opportunity for Greenville to grow?
I agree with that. It's got to be looked at and got to be followed.
We got bond committee meeting at 5:30,
yes,
so by the time you hear the show, we're going to be right in the midst of it. But I guess we're going to have a lot more discussion. We should try to narrow the whole thing down of which direction we go as a city and
Right.
make some hard choices of what
That's
is
right.
what is allowed in the repairs and maintenance side, what is good for the city, or
That's
what for
right.
the city should be budgeting on an annual basis versus, what do we want to invest for in the future?
Right.
And that goes back to the whole leadership standpoint that
Think so
we've got to
too.
have as a city, that we got to have as a nation and as a state. Everyone wants I want it now.
Right.
The generation is where we are, but we need to be establishing ourselves for 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road of how can we build this city, how can we build this state.
That's right.
For that.
Well, I think the bond issue is going to have to be done in steps. I think it's going to be impossible to get everything that we want and need in this first bond, but I think we're going to have to decide what will work in the first bond and then look at the step process and see how we can get to where our city needs to be.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
It
I think
is.
we have every other week. And again, if you're listening, you have the opportunity in the public to join these meetings to hear what we're
That's right.
discussing. It is every other Wednesday. So tonight it'll be again in 2 weeks, 5:30 on the third floor of City Hall. And you're always welcome to email us at greenvillegrit@gmail.com if you got any questions you want us to ask about the bond and
That's right.
or even discuss with the city council. So it was a fun show with Tom Tillis. As always, we have to go back and thank the sponsors that allow the show to be possible. So Greenville Toyota and the greenvilletoyota.com, Kidd Construction Group, kcgbuildgreen.com,
The Overton Group.
the Overton Group at ovtgroup.com. I think I got all the websites right. And then Ribeye Steakhouse.
That's right.
25% discount if you mention the Greenville Grit, but you've got to mention the Greenville Grit.
That's right.
So Terry, again, it was cool to have Tom on. We've got we're going to try to get Brian Brown back on eventually, as well as Walter Jones. So thank you for joining us tonight. You can see us again 6:30 Friday night on Cable 7 or 9:30 Saturday morning. And until next week, Michael Overton and Terry Williams on the Greenville Grit.